Okay, I think we should get started. Can you hear me? Loud and clear? Okay, excellent. We have three speakers this morning. Uh, our first speaker is going to be Aaron Burmeister from Nome, and I'm sporting the Nome Kennel Club T-shirt, which comes from the conference that we had in Nome years ago. So, Aaron, glad to be here.
Great.
So a bit about Aaron. He comes from a dog mushing heritage of his parents. And when I asked him how many times he had run the Iditarod, I said, "You've run it several times, right?" And he said, "Yeah, 23." Been very active with the Nome Kennel Club, and we'll hear more about that in his talk. The second speaker is Tyler Kirk. And Tyler is associate professor at the University of Alaska Fairbanks here. He holds the Farthauer Chair in History, and he is a historian of Russia and the Soviet Union and the Circumpolar North. He takes in all of that country. He is the author of After the Gulag, A History of Memory of Russia's Far North, which was published by Indiana University Press in 2023. He's currently working on two projects. One is the Hope Race, a dog race, and the other is looking at the environmental history of the Gulag in the Soviet Union. Our third speaker, Pierce Bateman, is a term assistant professor of history at the University of Alaska Anchorage. He specializes in Alaska, the Pacific, the United States, and global history. He has been presenting at the Alaska Historical Society, I think since 2017, and he has published several articles and book reviews in the Society's journal. Most recently, his article, Through Shoepak's Lens, Alaska's Constitutional Convention as photographed by delegate Leonard King, 1955 to 56, will be published in the upcoming edition. So we'll look forward to that and some of those images. His presentation today is a continuation of his ongoing research looking at the connections between Alaska and Japan. So we have three vibrant speakers, and we'll start with Aaron. So Aaron, you're on.
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much for giving me the opportunity to be here. And sorry I can't be there in person. I'm traveling right now, but as I was introduced, born and raised in Nome, Alaska, spent most of my life there. Had the opportunity to be born into a mushing family, so kind of got hooked on it at an early age, and grew up running the junior circuit, which every Wednesday night, pretty much from December through April, we have junior races, 1, 3, and 6 dog junior races, and 10 dog championship races at the end of the season through my childhood, and then had the opportunity to travel around the state as a child, racing in the Ferrandi World Championships and Junior Iditarod and multiple other things. So incredible way to grow up. And the Kennel Club played a vital role in educating and bringing out that competitive edge and helping to keep the sport alive in Nome. And growing up as a child, having the opportunity to sit around the table with a lot of the old timers, Howard Farley and Al Crane, and so many people that were there long before I came around, but listen to my dad drink coffee with them, with Rick Swenson, Jerry Austin, Herman Yakpuck. Our home in Nome was kind of one of the collecting places at the end of Iditarod. So growing up those guys were my heroes, and having the opportunity to listen to their stories, listen about the history of it, and just left an impression on me that just brought forth a love for the event, love for the sport of dog mushing, and an interest in the history of it. So that's something that I've dug into my entire life, and always looked back for. And I felt honored that the Kennel Club asked me to make this presentation. So I threw together a lot of the oral history that I've heard over the years, and as well as threw in some quotes from Leonard Seppala and Albert Fink, and I'll take the opportunity now to read through it with you. And it's kind of as my memory and what I've put together. So if you have any questions or comments, I'd be happy to answer them at the end. But sled dog racing is all about overcoming adversity. And throughout its 118 years, the Nome Kennel Club has overcome its share of adversities, but it has persevered and continues to promote the sport of sled dog racing today. The Nome Kennel Club was formed in 1907 with a goal to improve the breed of sled dogs and determine the best dogs and drivers, as well as to better the care and conditions of the sled dogs. It was also to provide winter entertainment for the people of the region, with high stakes betting and gambling taking place around all the events. The first All Alaska Sweepstakes was organized, and it took place April 1st of 1908. Quote here by Albert Fink, who is the original president and helped create the Nome Kennel Club. We all know what an important part dogs have contributed to the development of Alaska, how dependent we are up here on them for transportation. I propose we establish a kennel club, the purpose of which will be to provide strains of Alaska dogs and to better their conditions. The annual All Alaska Sweepstakes races will serve to prove which dogs are the best. I predict that dog racing in Alaska will prove as popular a sport as horse racing in Kentucky. Albert Fink. He was a kennel owner, dog fancier, and the quote was from 1907. With the words spoken above at the Board of Trade Saloon in 1907, the Nome lawyer and a few friends set in motion the creation of the Nome Kennel Club, which would be the first to formalize rules for racing dogs. Founded on the same principles as rules laid out for horse racing by the jockey clubs of Kentucky and elsewhere. Albert Fink served as the first president of the Nome Kennel Club and helped set the foundation for all sled dog races in Alaska. These early races and competitions were big entertainment for the community, and all the events had gambling and betting taking place. Winners became heroes throughout the region as the best mushers and their teams were celebrated. I've got a following excerpt here from Leonard Seppala's book, a little bit from Leonard about the history, as he recalls it, of the Nome Kennel Club. In 1907, I heard of a dog race at Snake River near the town of Nome. Most dog drivers were schoolboys. I was not present, as I was busy working in the mines. In 1908, the Nome Kennel Club was organized by Albert Fink, who became its president. The idea made rapid headway with the sport-loving public. Until that time, skiing had been the principal out-of-the-door sport. But with the introduction of new and faster dogs, the attention of the public was focused on dog racing. Nearly every man in the community had at one time or another driven a dog team. Even men from the Mediterranean had been forced to resort to this means of travel during the stampedes or when they engaged in prospecting and mining. The Scandinavians had been most prominent in the use of skis, but dog racing promised a national sport for Alaska. On April 1st, 1908, the All Alaska Sweepstakes race, over a course of 408 miles, was inaugurated. The excitement was intense. Every man and woman in the community who could get there was present at the start in the Barrack Square on Front Street. There was a telephone line along the sweepstakes trail to Candle, the turning point, and the position of each team was reported from stations established along the line to Nome and posted on blackboards, in saloons, and other public places. The Board of Trade Saloon was the main headquarters of the race, and here the people crowded to read the news on the blackboard and place their bets. Hundreds of thousands of dollars changed hands during those days. It was an excerpt from Seppala, Alaskan Dog Driver by Elizabeth Wicker. Throughout the history of Alaska, dogs have played an ever important role in everyday life. They were used by the indigenous people of Alaska as companions and working animals in everyday life, from hauling wood, hunting, trapping, hauling ice for drinking water, and all their daily day-to-day and subsistence activities. Then in the late 1800s, as the gold rush hit Alaska, the dogs were used for transportation to get the miners and their supplies across the territory to destinations, remote and in new communities alike, by freighting all their gear and helping to keep them alive and their minds and everything productive. In Nome, the dogs were used to pull railroad cars along the Seward Peninsula Railroad and to freight materials to these remote mines, food and supplies to remote mining camps around the region. They were also used for delivering mail to communities all over Alaska all the way into the 1940s. On a side note, I've got family members, my wife's family, her father, Billy Hogendorn, told me many, many stories over the years about hauling mail through Nome to Teller to Brevig Mission up to Shishmath, Buckland, Darien, and then meeting up with the Kotzebue Bell teams as he was one of the mail drivers in the 30s and 40s. And I grew up hearing stories from him about delivering the mail and meeting the other teams and making his way around the region. And it's quite entertaining and interesting. The Nome Kennel Club and the All Alaska Sweepstakes thrived until 1917. It is said that World War I caused a decline in competitive mushing in Nome, but during those active racing years, the quality of the sled dog and breeding improved drastically, as shown in the finishing times of the All Alaska Sweepstakes. The sled dog went from a freighter to a more streamlined racing dog, and the Siberian Husky sled dogs were imported, played a big role in the advancement. The care of the dogs in the kennels and feeding of the dogs improved as well, advancing the sport considerably. As a unique side note, during World War I, the French military sought help from Nome, Alaska. Sled dogs from a renowned dog breeder and Nome musher Scotty Allen supplied, trained, and provided 106 dogs that were transported to France. These dogs, their handlers, were crucial for military operations, laying telephone wires and carrying ammunition and supplies over difficult, previously inaccessible mountainous routes. Their heroic efforts earned 3 dogs the Croix de Guerre, which is France's highest military honor. As the Nome Kennel Club faded into the shadows and racing had declined for several years, the dogs were still being used for freighting and delivering mail when a tragedy struck Nome in 1925. The diphtheria epidemic. The hospital's supply of antiserum had expired, and the fastest way to get the life-saving serum to Nome was by dog team. A relay of the 20 best dog drivers in the territory were organized to deliver the serum 674 miles from Nenana to Nome. They managed to deliver the serum in just over 5 days. The historic serum run received worldwide attention through the act of heroism by the sled dogs and their drivers. This introduced the sled dogs to the rest of the United States and popularized the Siberian Husky. Many of the mushers and their dogs went on tour around the lower 48 states and became heroes. Some are in statues, along with Balto and others, and became, as we all know, the serum run has had many stories and movies and books written about it. Back in Nome, the Nome Kennel Club picked up again and began holding shorter races, and that continued until the late 1930s before it tapered off again. The beginning of World War II brought about the end of the gold rush in the Nome area, and the community, as well as the Nome Kennel Club, slowly tapered off for many years. A unique thing about that, with World War II coming on and the gold rush coming to an end, it I spent a lot of my time and childhood and for many years when I'm not working or I'll be traveling in the country checking out old mine sites, just curiosity. And there's a lot of remote mine sites on the Seward Peninsula that I've been out to. And a unique thing, some of them are untouched because they're so hard and remote to get to. ATVs and four-wheelers haven't gotten there. But there's still canned food on the shelves. There's magazines from 1941, 1942 still sitting there and old newspaper articles on the counters in some of these places. And it really sets back and shows the impact that World War II had on the gold rush and the miners. Some of these remote dredges and remote mining camps are still, looks like somebody closed the door and walked out one day and they've never returned. So that's I'm still constantly looking for new ones, but I visited a lot of the old mining camps, and it's really really special to see that. By the 1950s, the popularity of mushing picked up in interior region of Alaska, in the Fairbanks area, all up and down the Yukon River, with the start of the North American Championships and a few smaller races being held during those days in the Nome area, but it was not consistent for many years. It wasn't until the start of the first Iditarod in 1973 that really fired up the Nome Kennel Club again. Howard Farley, an early organizer and volunteer of the first Iditarod, as well as close friend of Joe Rentian Sr., pushed really hard to end the Iditarod in Nome. Howard stated, as in the day prior to it starting, Joe Sr. and many of the early organizers wanted it to go to the remote mining camp of Iditarod and return back to Kinnick. And Howard stated, of course, Nome is the obvious place to end the race because much of the rich history to sled dogs in Alaska. To help promote Nome being the finish line of the Iditarod, Howard Farley, along with Carl Govinovich, Ethan Windall, Leo Rasmussen, my parents, Richard and Lynette Burmeister, Ray Lang, and many others got together to restart the club. Howard stated he had no problem bringing the club back to active status as there were many kennels already in the Nome area and lots of young up-and-coming mushers. Howard and others raised funds through local businesses and many visits to the bars where most business in Nome took place in those days. The Nome Kennel Club helped to fund and put on a proper finish for the first Iditarod. To this day, the club still sponsors the award for fastest time from safety to Nome, as well as the Howard Farley Award. As the club became more active, they began to hold Sunday afternoon races that the community would come out to watch as spectators, with many local volunteers helping to put them on. In 1983, the club put on the 75th anniversary of the All Alaska Sweepstakes, which was won by Rick Swenson in 84 hours. Then again in 2008, the Nome Kennel Club put on the 100th anniversary of the All Alaska Sweepstakes. This race brought about many local mushers, along with several of the Iditarod's top competitors. Mitch Seavey won the event in 2008 in 61 hours. From the early 1970s to current day, the Nome Kennel Club still holds weekend races during the winter in Nome. Though the mushing community in Nome has decreased in recent years, the club is still active. Currently, the club works to promote dog care, responsible pet ownership, as well as preserving the historic use of sled dogs for work, travel, and racing. Along with organizing races, the club works to maintain the trails in the Nome area, along with marking them and placing permanent reflective posts throughout well-used stretches of trails that are prone to dangerous winter conditions. This is a big community service as well. The club also maintains the Top Cock Shelter Cabin in the area east of Nome called the Blowhole. What is the
About
future?
5 minutes, Aaron.
No problem. I'm winding down. So, what is the future of the Nome Kennel Club in dog mushing? With the decline of salmon in many of our major rivers in Alaska, the cost of maintaining a kennel rising, there are many challenges. As a member of the Nome Kennel Club for my entire life and growing up on dog sled, maintaining a kennel of sled dogs, I've had the opportunity to travel and race dogs all around North America and to Europe as well. The sport of mushing is alive and well. For it to grow and stay alive, it is very important we continue to work together to promote the events that take place, support young mushers, and continue to educate others. The sport will continue as the love of dogs will always be there. And
Thank you.
you bet. Thank you. Not sure if you have any questions for me. Just kind of winding that down.
No, that's great. We'll hold off on questions until everyone has spoken. So
Okay, very good.
please stay with us.
You
Tyler,
bet.
next.
Do I need to do anything to load up the PowerPoint? All right, cool. Exactly. Awesome. Can't believe how many of you came out for an 8:30 Saturday morning panel. This is astounding. You put all the Russian historians to shame. Yeah, I appreciate that. I hope I don't disappoint. I'm so glad you're here to do this. I struggle to do this at the start of every class I teach. Okay, fantastic. Hi, everybody. I'm Tyler Kirk. I'm a historian at the UAF, here at UAF. I am a Russian Soviet historian, so I appreciate you entertaining me here at the Alaska Historical Society. It's really fantastic. Thanks for make gestures if you can't hear me and I drop the mic. I'm really happy to be here. I think it's fantastic. The conference has been amazing, and my thanks to everybody who's put a lot of hard work into putting this on, and all the researchers who've presented and people who've shown up to panels. So I'm a historian of the Soviet period. I wrote a book about Gulag survivors, and what's the connection to this? Absolutely nothing. But in another sense, though, the time period is the same. I came to this topic through falling in love with dog mushing myself, thanks to Will, who helped me train my first dog, which was a Malamute. I quickly switched to Huskies, and I only needed one to learn. And so I'm amazed that this race ever happened. And when I tell people in my field, in the field of Russian and Soviet history, they're absolutely gut shot that this ever happened. And it blows my mind as well. And so this is a really preliminary project for me. It's a new direction in research. And so I want to talk to you about sort of the visual history of the race. There's a fantastic book by Helen Hegener that is a edge of your seat narrative of the race. And so if you want a narration of the race and to learn more about that, I highly recommend you check that book out. It's really, really good. And so my talk today is called Circumpolar Reconnections, Hope 91 Sled Dog Race, and the End of the Cold War. I hit space. All right. There we go. And so this race took place in 1991. In April 1991, as you know, the Soviet Union collapses in December 1991. So this is the kind of like peak period of glasnost and perestroika, period of Soviet history in which Mikhail Gorbachev, and we'll talk about him in a second, came to power with the goal of exorcising the demons of the Stalinist past and come on in, Molly, and making a new future for the Soviet Union. So this race took place between Nome in Alaska and Anadyr in the Soviet Union. I hope you enjoy this map. It took me many hours to make using Google Earth. It was absolutely astounding expedition goodwill race. They only raced for the last like 200 or so miles. The rest of the time, it was truly an expedition on a snow machine track in the Soviet Far East. I mean, really, truly, this was really rugged, unbroken terrain. One of the key questions when I first learned about this race was, how did the thaw in relations between the Soviet Union and the United States create a lead for the reunification of dog cultures that grew separately and in different directions due to the divisions of Cold War politics, which separated indigenous communities across the Bering Strait? And what is the legacy of this race? It is no longer an intercontinental international race. It is still going on. It hasn't been an intercontinental race since 1992. The 90s in Russia were a really difficult period of time, the time of troubles, the hungry times. And so there wasn't a lot of support for this kind of thing. Of course, the hardening in relations between the United States and Russia have also totally recast this period. And this is an era of of quote unquote hope, not to make a pun on words or play on words, but it was truly an era of hope, a hope for a democratic future in Russia, but also in the United States, which has been dashed by the rise of authoritarianism in Eurasia and other events happening around the world. All right, so Mikhail Gorbachev, maybe you know about him, maybe you don't. But he came to power in 1985. He was replaced the last of the Stalin old guard, the people that had been promoted under Stalin, to give you a little Soviet history lesson. And he came to power. He was truly a dyed-in-the-wool communist. He really believed in Marxism, Leninism. He believed that the Soviet Union, the Communist Party, had gone astray. And if he talked about Stalin's crimes and he opened things up, that everybody would be super grateful and the project would continue, and that just didn't happen. And so he gave a speech in Murmansk in 1987, in which he defined the Soviet Union's Arctic periphery as central to the country's future. And the speech outlined a vision of history that underscored the region's centrality to Soviet identity. But it also posited a vision of the Arctic as the setting in which the Soviet Union would cautiously renew its relationship with the West. And that is where the Hope Race comes in. And so he said, quote, "The Arctic is not only the Arctic Ocean, but also the northern tips of 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and America. It is the place where Eurasian, North American, and Asian Pacific regions meet, where the frontiers come close to one another in the interest of states belonging to mutually opposed military blocs and non-aligned ones cross. The North is also a problem of security of the Soviet Union's northern frontiers. We have had some historical experience which cost us dearly. The people of Murmansk remember well the years 1918 to 1919, when the United States and its allies invaded the new Soviet state to support the Tsarist regime. And then in 1941 to 1945, when the Soviet Union, of course, was at war with the Germans and the Axis powers. And he says, let the north of the globe, the Arctic, become a zone of peace. Let the north be a pole of peace. And so this is the background that I want to give you in which the Soviet Union and Alaska were trying to find their way forward. And this is the Hope Race flag. It says Intercontinental Race on dog sleds. And you can see the Alaskan flag up top and the Soviet flag with the big Russian N. Looks like a Latin English H. And the rule book. So one of the things I've been really fascinated by and in my research as a historian is drawing on personal archives, in oral histories, and increasingly images. And so the rule book for the 1992 Hope Race kind of perfectly, like page 1, paragraph 1, is that this race is all about developing friendly ties between the now Russian Federation, right? The Soviet Union's gone in 92. And also the United States, with a specific goal of reviving traditional sports of the peoples of the far north. And I included this quote specifically because when Stalin, and I'm trying, so if anybody's a Russian historian in here and knows of this archival document, please approach me at the end of the talk. But when Stalin collectivized agriculture in 1932, to break the back of the peasantry, it also impacted indigenous peoples, indigenous reindeer herders, Chukchi peoples. And I've not found any, I've read it somewhere, but I've not found any archival source that says that dog mushing was in particularly targeted. But I would not be surprised if it was attempted to be standardized within the Soviet period. Dog mushing was not a sport in Eurasia. It was a subsistence activity. Indigenous peoples used dogs to get around in these incredibly remote, harsh landscapes. And so the race in 1991, when I interviewed Mary Shields and Kate Pearsons and John Van Zyl, who was one of the race organizers, and others, and Leah Rasmussen, who was also the mayor of Nome and one of the founders of the race. And when they talk about the race, this was the first time that Alaskan quote-unquote professional racers went to the Soviet Union, and that Chukchi mushers just had no idea how to race. They did not participate in the kind of professional race culture. Their dogs were very large, very fluffy. They're meant for freighting, right? And moving long distances, but certainly not, they were not going 1,000 miles for fun. And so this was an interesting sort of, in my mind, meeting of two very different dog cultures that had grown separately over the course of the Cold War. And so the images that we have from the race, so Frank Flavin was the official Iditarod photographer, and he was one of the people that was along for the race. And his widow, Gail, has very generously given me access to his slides from the trip to the Soviet Far East. This is Mary Shields at the start in Nome. You can see her non-Malamute, Malamute-y giant dogs in the photo that look similar to, but are very different still from the Chukchi dogs that we'll show here in a second. But ultimately, one of the things I've been fascinated by is this idea of images as a source of history. I mean, I see these images truly, the images that John Van Zyl took on his trip to the Soviet Union on this race as a sort of race journal, right? This is a narrative taken through images. And it also astounds me that John, whom I interviewed, who was the official Iditarod artist still, painted only one painting of this race, and that was the Hope 91 poster, which is fascinating to me in its own right. But through the images that Frank and John put together for this race that are really just document the whole process of going to the Soviet Union through mush dogs, reveal to us the Soviet Union, the Soviet Far East through Alaskan eyes, right? This is very much a subjective source that reveals to us how Alaskans saw the Soviet Union. In Helen's book, you can read about how when they got to Wales that they took a Soviet helicopter, they just loaded it with dogs and with people, nothing was strapped in or strapped down, and flew across the Bering Strait. You can see Mary loading her dogs here in her sled. It's just in there. There are loose gas cans and wires out and about. The helicopter took several days to get there, and when the thing landed on the ground, everybody kissed the ground because it was absolutely, totally terrifying. And that's a story that everybody I've talked to has shared with me. We talk about verifying sources. That is a verified fact. That it was absolutely terrifying. So the race, they raced from Nome, and had to restart. Obviously, they couldn't mush across the Bering Sea ice in April, and so when they get to Welin in the Russian Far East, the Soviet Far East, I'm going to use Russian and Soviet interchangeably. Please forgive me. I'd be really annoyed if my students did that, but I'm a professor, and so. They restart the race in Welland, and when they get there, they're greeted by these massive, it doesn't look like a massive crowd here, but they were swarmed by people, right? They had already dug out dog yards. This was a really, really big deal. The Soviet Arctic had been colonized, and I use the word colonized, industrialized by forced labor, right? Primarily. It wasn't only forced labor, but prisoners who were sent into exile or into labor camps were some of the primary colonizers, industrializers of the region, alongside the indigenous people who had always lived there. And so this was a really big deal to have Americans come to the Russian Far East. This was not the first time that they'd seen them, though. There was a Bering Land Bridge expedition in 1989, in which they tried to, it was an American from Minnesota and a Soviet polar explorer. They were trying to ski across the Bering Strait, which they also couldn't do that. They had to take skin boats when they hit the water. They did have some dogs. There were some indigenous peoples who brought dogs with them, but there weren't very many. And the one documentary that you can Google and look at YouTube features a dog fight. The Chukchi dogs liked to bite everything that got near them. And so as we move through the sort of like visual history of this race, we see different modes of transportation. We see different landscapes. Here you can see remnants of whaling. Here in the background, we have these vizdechots. They're basically Argos, Soviet Argos, that participants remember as being incredibly toxic smelling inside the cabin, very rough going. At one point, people just bundled up and rode on the roof so that they did not die from asphyxiation. They were confronted as they moved south and along the coast, heading to Anadyr, Anadyr being the capital of Chukotka, where the race finishes. Were confronted by the crumbling of the Soviet Union, looking at how villages and cities, in Russian we call them mono cities, they're basically company towns. They had like one single industry, like in the region that I lived in the Komi Republic, in the European Arctic of Russia. Like one town was responsible for mining coal, one town's responsible for mining timber, one town's responsible for mining oil, one town's responsible for managing prisoners. And so we see sort of the slow retreat of Moscow from the periphery. Gorbachev talks a lot about how central the Arctic is to Russian and Soviet identity. The Russians had pushed first north into the Arctic and then east, as you all are very familiar with, till they eventually hit Alaska. But in this period of time when the Soviet Union is crumbling and collapsing, subsidies for remote Arctic regions dried up. And at one point, indigenous peoples that once could rely on regular supplies from Moscow, food, whatever, gas, things like that, they were gone suddenly. And so they had to revert back to indigenous subsistence lifestyles, which the Soviets, the Bolsheviks, tried really hard to curb and curtail through things like the Red Tent or other like cultural bases that the Bolsheviks deployed to acculturate indigenous peoples and make them all Soviet, right? And if you're interested in reading about Soviet nationalities policy, there's a huge literature on that, and you can ask questions about that. I want to move through these because I'd like to leave time for questions. But again, you can see sort of the sprawl of the Soviet project and the Alaskan American fascination with this closed territory. This was a region of the Soviet Union and today the Russian Federation that is closed off even to most Soviet and Russian people. This was a region colonized by forced labor. It was a region militarized by the Soviets and maintained so as by the Russians. And so the fact that they just let a bunch of American, Alaskan, Swiss, Japanese, and other indigenous dog mushers just roll through it in 1991 really kind of underscores, I can't stress enough, the special moment that's gone forever. Villages, they were confronted by poverty in Soviet villages and also alcoholism. Tragically, some people broke into the drop bags and drank the heat and died. And this led to really uncomfortable, scary conversations with local KGB officers that were dispatched to deal with this. This is some of the story that Mary shared with me, Kate shared with me, and also John, who was one of the people they interrogated. But specifically, these slides of Chukchi mushers are really fascinating to me. They show sort of how Soviet indigenous peoples maintained their traditional lifestyles, their traditional modes of transportation, despite the standardization of Soviet life, especially in the Arctic. One of the fascinations that all of the dog mushers who participated in this event was that Chukchi sled dogs were particularly large, furry, and ferocious. These were dogs that they used to defend reindeer herding camps, that they used to freight sea mammals, and Alaskan mushers were particularly shocked, stunned, amazed by the fact that all they usually fed them was walrus meat that they would chop up along the way and chuck to them. And they traveled incredibly light. Chukchi mushers sat on their sleds, and if you go and look at the YouTube footage of the Hope race today in Chukotka, they are still sitting on their sleds. There are some mushers who use Alaskan-style sleds, and I think that that is another interesting paper on the cultural syncretism of cross-cultural interactions. But by and large, they continue to use the same style of dog sleds as they have in the past. I see Bill's looking at his watch. I better go faster. As they move through the tundra, they moved quite slowly. If it weren't for the sort of goodwill expedition sentiment of the race, they would have not been anywhere in the top positions, according to Kate and Mary and John. And we can see here in this really poor photograph of a photograph on your left, the different modes of transportation. We have a Chukchi sled, Alaska, like I guess modern dog sled, and also a Vistichuts. And all of these modes of transportation were absolutely essential to maintaining life in the Soviet Arctic, to maintaining this broad sense of control over a vast landscape and project power. The snapshots, and this is, I include this kind of all-encompassing slide as an example of the types of sources that I really think are fascinating for historians to talk about. And I wanted to talk a little bit about methods for like 2 seconds, is that I encourage all of us to think broadly about archives. As historians, as people interested in history, all the information that we can get about the past is not only contained in the Rasmussen archive, although it contains great jewels, in state archives or in libraries. But people create archives out of their lives. And I think that this kind of autobiographical narration through photography, through journals, letters, diaries, is something that we often turn to when we're writing about trauma and political repression. I mean, I'm talking from my experience, trauma and political repression, but they can also reveal a great deal about things that don't come up in history. I mean, the documentary archival record for this race, at least from this side of things, and in this early stage of this research, is very thin. And I'd be really amazed if we could go safely to Chukotka today. If we all got on the plane and went to Chukotka in Anadyr, I'd be really fascinated to look at the Executive Committee of Sport and Physical Culture. This is a really big deal. There's gonna be a state archival record and a huge debate about this in the party archives. Just thinking about the debates I saw about former prisoners who married good party girls and the huge debate that entailed, this would be even bigger. And they also probably were trying to decide on who would keep an eye on and keep tabs on these people. I will note, going back to this slide, I will note that there was only one translator for all of the mushers in this race who was also running the race. That guy must have been relieved when it was done. And he amazingly was the only Chukchi musher I've heard a lot of different stories about this, so I won't make a historical judgment, but it sounds like for visa reasons, they let only one musher come to Alaska, and he was the one that started in Nome. And he actually ran a team of Reddington's dogs. And the leader, apparently, according to John, didn't know how to G and ha, so he was constantly yelling in a thick Russian accent, G, ha, and going nowhere. As you can see, the landscape, and this is one of the, I think, the cultural diplomatic aspects of these photos, is that the landscapes of Chukotka and the landscapes of Alaska are very similar. And for people coming out of the Cold War, years of animosity, and thinking about cross-cultural connections, vital lifeways, that this would have been, to mush in places that looked like home, I think, really have a huge impact on people who ultimately went back to their towns and cities and became cultural diplomats to Americans, right? These Alaskans came home and then they shared their experiences of hospitality and goodwill with others. This is Mary coming into Providenia with her dogs. Mary was not the fastest musher in this race, but she grouped together with other indigenous mushers and other people and actually ended up sheltering them in a really huge storm. She told me about the special tent that she had that was connected to her sled that was made for one, and she fit 3 people in it in a hurry. And so again, back to John Van Zyle's slides, you can see this kind of like frenetic, quick, multiple shots of the same thing when Kate Pearsons came into Anadyr ahead of everybody else. She really ran away with it. And the celebration of sort of Russian style celebration of bread and salt at the finish line. It's a picture of a picture, which I apologize for. It kind of gives us a sense of the things that Alaskans were fascinated by. I mean, the Van Zyl album has lots of shots of like a wall with like 5 pairs of shoes on it, just because of the time of the deficit time in the Soviet Union. And pictures of the dogs. John was very interested in bringing a dog home with him. And I think that these images, if we were to sit with them longer and reflect on them, could provide us with a story of an era that is unfortunately gone forever. And so this is a so what? I ask my students this all the time. Several of them are here today. And so what's the big deal with this? It's about cultural diplomacy through sport. This is about reviving dog mushing culture in the Russian Far East. The Hope race helped to bring it to light throughout the Soviet Union and Russia today. Dog mushing was a subsistence mode of transportation, and it also enabled indigenous people to rescue themselves when Moscow abandoned them in the 1990s. They're racing to this day. Again, it's no longer, as I said before, an intercontinental international race. It's locals only, pretty much. For a little while before Russia invaded Crimea and then the full-scale invasion in Ukraine, there were some foreigners who would participate. There was another race called Beringia that attracted international mushers, some people from Norway who also ran dogs in Alaska. But I wanted to end with this quote from Dmitry Shparo, who was a polar explorer, a Soviet polar explorer who was part of the Bering Land Bridge expedition. And I think this is the real so what here. He says, what's important to me is what is happening in my own country. Having Americans in Chukotka strongly accelerates the process of opening doors. And so this was ultimately about bringing people together, indigenous communities, non-indigenous peoples, people who are on opposite sides of the cultural divide, the political divide, really fierce enemies, and showing them that rather than cooking each other with nuclear weapons or bullets, that perhaps we could get together and have a dog race. So I'll end it there. Thanks for listening to my ramble.
Good one. Pierce, let me see if I can quiet these people down for a second. If we close things down, we're getting a lot of noise. I wasn't successful in getting them to close anything, but Pierce will be animated, so I'm sure that we'll be able to make it. Here, be animated.
Is this animated enough? Can folks hear me? Well, oh, I better set a timer. I know you're keeping time, but you know, I'm used to doing the hour 15-minute lecture, and I'd take it if I was given it. So, to save you all from listening to me prattle on, we'll do that. Tyler, my God, man, what an exciting project! I know about the U.S. Bering Land Bridge. That book and that race is one of my favorites. Did not know about the 91. Wow, we got to talk, man. That is so exciting. Ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, I don't really have any dogs in my presentation, so I was lucky enough to get fitted onto a panel at the very last minute. So anyway, forgive me for not having any hounds on this. And thank you so much for attending this panel. I know that there are so many exciting presentations going on in the room next door, so thank you for choosing this one. So for those who know me and have seen me before, you know that I talk about Alaska-Japan relations. This was my topic at last year's conference. I talked about my archival work in Tokyo as related to kind of Alaska-Japanese relations. And so this project is a continuation of that last talk. And I'd kind of like to set the scene here just a little bit. So the time is 2 years ago in August, and I'm with my spouse, and we're strolling through Jimbocho, going through the used bookstores. And it's just crazy kind of alleyways and things with tiny little bookshops with books stacked, like, you know, basically holding, you know, the ceilings of these stores together. And it's just they're filled. Magazines, ephemera, you know, VHS tape, God knows what else. And, you know, piles of dust, all that kind of jazz. And, you know, we're scouring, you know, what can we find related to Alaska and Japan? And we looked and we looked, and our feet grew tired. And finally, in the last shop, I find a map. And it's a map of the Aleutian Islands from 1942. And it blows my mind. It blows my mind for a couple of reasons. One, here I am in Tokyo looking at a map, you know, from 1942. Crazy to see a map of Alaska so far from home of that particular vintage. But what is particularly exciting is that in Japanese, usually Atu and Kiska are labeled in katakana. For those who don't know, katakana is one of the Japanese alphabets. This is the alphabet that is most often used for foreign loan words, so to give you know, a place name or something. This map did not have the word for Atu or Kiska on it. It had instead the names, and let me look at my notes here. It had the names Atsuta and Narukami on it. And I thought, that is interesting. Therein lies a story. So I'd like to start there. Let's go back. We're going to be here in Tokyo. On the streets, same streets that I was walking on, and we go to a book peddler who's peddling some publications here. And we might imagine that the publications that they've got are the Shashin Shuho. Shashin means photograph, Shuho means weekly, so this is the photographic weekly. And I'm curious to know, after looking at this map, what do the Japanese understand of the Aleutian campaign during World War II? Not the generals, not the soldiers on the islands. This is well-trod ground. What did the Japanese public know and understand of Alaska and this particular theater of war? And the best way to do that is to probably look at the most widely circulated publication in Japan at this time, and that is the Shashin Shuho. So let's talk about it. So why, I guess, in the first place, should we have a Japanese perspective of the Aleutians campaign? Well, one, no one's really asked about it. The sea of historiography of you know, World War II Alaska is wide and deep. For those, you know, that participated and remember the 93 symposium, there's been a lot of work written about this, but no one has really asked about this kind of Japanese public perception of the war. And I think if there isn't one for the Americans, that we can kind of intimate one through the kind of extensive historiography here. The other reason that I think this really matters is that Japan matters to Alaska. Last year, I made the argument to you all that if we take kind of a materialist view of history, and I do because I like economics, then the post-war history of Alaska, at least 20% of that, 10 to 20%, should be about our relationship with Japan because of our significant trade relationship with them. They are no longer our #1 trade partner. They were supplanted in 2013 by China, but for a long time, Alaska traded billions and billions and billions of dollars with Japan. So this story matters because the public perception of the war might affect, this is kind of my hypothesis, might affect their immediate post-war relationship with Alaska in the aftermath of that. Okay, so I'm curious, what is this perception then, coming right out of the war? So hopefully we'll talk about that. To kind of illustrate my point here, the wonderful economist George Rogers, he wrote in his The Future of Alaska, 1962, he said, only 4 years after the end of World War II, Japan began a more successful Alaska invasion, meaning an economic invasion, so kind of some historical irony here. A little precursor, there is a pre-war perspective of Alaska for the Japanese. For those who attended Victor Schmagen's and Tane Timling's wonderful presentation yesterday, there is a deep history of pre-war Alaska-Japan relations. But on the eve of World War II, there's this great book, America wa Nihon to Arasuwazu, America Will Not Fight Japan. And in this book, and he's kind of a far-right crank in the 1930s, but he says, in order to prevent war with the United States, the United States must give Japan both Hawaii and Alaska. This will prevent war. This is kind of our rightful area. This is not a widespread view, but just so we kind of know, this is in the ecosystem at the time there. But that is, I think, just to say, for some, Alaska pre-war already kind of sits in the Japan imperial imaginary. There is a desire for some for Alaska to be part of Japan. All right, so like I said, I'm curious then in all of this, how this might shape post-war perceptions. All right, so what the hell is a Shashin Shuho? Like I said, this means photographic weekly. It's published between 1938 and 1945, spans 375 issues, technically 373. There are 2 issues that are combined in kind of a double issue, but for all intents and purposes, let's call it 375. It is a publication of the Cabinet Intelligence Department, which is later renamed the Cabinet Intelligence Bureau. And in the inaugural issue, the stated purpose of this magazine is that it is going to be one of many parts of the Japanese government's broader propaganda campaign to inform, convince, and boost morale of the Japanese citizenry of the nation's war effort through, quote, the extremely powerful role of photography, okay? They themselves do not use the word propaganda in this quote, but for all intents and purposes, this is a government publication. This is a piece of wartime propaganda. This is how the government wants the Japanese public to understand it. So how impactful is this publication in Japan? One, it's super low cost. It's costs only 10 sen. For kind of a point of reference here, a bowl of soba noodles is only 15 sen, so this is cheaper than a meal in Japan. If you're thinking, why not a bowl of rice? It's because this is wartime and buckwheat noodles are much cheaper. So this is kind of our good comparison there. It's widely available. Again, it's a piece of propaganda. The government wants to get it out there. In 1941, this had a circulation of 200,000 issues. In 1942, in the period that we're looking at today, it had a circulation of over 300,000 issues. Now, the magazine conducted a readership survey that asked subscribers how many people they passed that magazine onto. So how many hands did it change through? And they calculated based on change of hands, based on distribution areas, that a conservative estimate of between 2 and 3 million people were reading this magazine. So remarkable. That beats out the top read newspaper in Japan at that time by about 1 million people. That's remarkable. So it is therefore most read publication during the war. It's a photographic magazine, ladies and gentlemen. There's not a whole lot of text on there. Why? Because Japan's literacy rate, which forgive me, I've forgotten the exact statistic, but it's not low, but it's not particularly high, particularly for the demographic that they're hoping to get, which is young people who aren't necessarily educated. So keeping the language simplistic, relying on images to tell the story, and also by providing furigana. This is the hiragana and katakana that you will put over the kanji. So kanji, these are the Chinese characters that are a little more difficult to read. Most Japanese people will know hiragana and katakana. If you don't have an education, it's difficult sometimes to know the kanji, especially if they're more obscure. So by providing furigana, which is a little translation of that kanji, more people can read this. So it's meant for a wide readership, for the most people to understand, piece of propaganda to really boil down the war. So how does Alaska then fit into this picture? There are 4 primary issues that deal with Alaska that have got like main articles. Now, Alaska appears in many other issues, at least briefly in passing. And after the defeat of the Japanese on Attu, it'll still make occasional appearances in post-1943 magazines. But for our purposes today, it's these 4 that we really care about that have kind of got some meat and potatoes to them. So let's take a look at these. So issue number 228, this is published July 8th, 1942. This is just a month after the bombing of Dutch Harbor, the capture of Attu and capture of Kiska there. And so we've got some quotes here, just to give you a little bit of flavor of this. So very minimal text in this magazine. So here's what some of that minimal text says. It says, "We close the path for the U.S. to attack us in the North Pacific by blasting Dutch Harbor on July 4th. Before the war, Americans called the Aleutian Islands the line of fire that points to Japan and hoped that they could counterattack us with the base of planes and submarines constructed on the islands. However, this hope of Americans quickly went away after our sharp ambush. Without that path, Americans had no choice but to stare at the operation map and sigh." So really, really kind of playing this up here. But curiously, this issue, let's look really quick at what this issue looks like. So here's some of our text there that I just read. Here we've got, the ships steaming into the Aleutians. Here are our troops getting ready to get off the ship. And here they are, come ashore. These are basically our images for this. Light on what actually happened on the ground. Mostly descriptions of the islands, kind of fluffy things on how amazing the Army and the Navy are. Lots of language of overcoming the weather and the terrain, but light on kind of any specifics about what's going on the ground there. Now, let me back this up for just a minute here. There are kind of 2 points of interest. Maybe it's all of interest, maybe not. Thank you, Will. There's a photo of some POWs, and there's a photo of Etta Jones here. So let me jump to this again. Here we've got our photo of the POWs. And actually, I'm a professor. I love a little show and tell. Let's see here. Tyler, you can pass this around. What's coming around is a press photo. I think either Associated Press or one of the wire services of the capture of a Japanese soldier either on Attu or Kiska. I can't remember. So as that gets passed around, say it again. Oh, it's for Dutch Harbor. Okay, thank you very much. I forgot what I have for my little show and tell here. As you read, take a look at the language on the back of that, how they characterize the capture of this POW. I'm fascinated by the language of this one. Let me scroll down to my notes here for this so that I can tell you what this says. Oh, for goodness sakes, I've got too much written here. Here it is. "We interrogated 2 garrison soldiers who failed to escape, Cofield and John. How many residents are there? 10, not 1 woman. Which company do you work for? It's not a company, it's the Navy. Do you like wars? We hate them." This is their capture or their language in here. So I just think that's interesting, kind of showing that these guys do not want to participate in this war. Again, who knows what the hell they actually said? You've got to keep in mind this is a piece of propaganda here. So I find that fascinating. Let me show you one more from this issue. To me, this is perhaps the most remarkable photo and bit of spin right here. I hope all of you have read the Etta Jones account of her capture on Attu and her life in Japan during the war as a prisoner of war. This is some really crazy spin here. Let me find my quote. I got to switch to a different document here. This one says, with their hands raised in fear, families of Chichagov's garrison came out, but were soon relieved after learning of the mercy of the emperor's military towards civilians. Children smiled first, and then their mother also smiled. For those of you who haven't read the book, this is not their mother. This is a BIA worker. When this photo was taken, we're about 30 minutes away from her husband being shot in the head inside of the radio telegraph station on the island there. There was not mercy. They were all captured and taken to Japan, were forced to live in awful conditions. Again, her husband was, essentially tortured and shot in the head. So I'm not sure how much mercy the emperor's military had there. Just fascinating. Again, that kind of propaganda spin there. I'll save any discussion of these other photo captions here, but just to say, lots of highlights of how cold this is, the rugged terrain, the weather, really painting kind of an environmental picture throughout here while touting the military. All right, here's issue number 230, my favorite. This was published July 22nd, 1942, so not very long after our last issue. It really, to me, this is the most interesting of all of these because it places the Aleutians in kind of the imperial scheme. The first issue shows, great, we've taken over this land, here's the environment. This is the issue that shows what this means in the imperial scheme here. So some more quotes. Our battlefront is truly wide. It is an undefeated fortress. While it is steamy and hot in midsummer in our territory, the Aleutian battlefront in the north is covered in snow and so cold that it pierces your bones. We are currently standing on the west side of the Aleutian Islands, looking out for the Bering Sea with the snowy Attu Island under our eyes. The fog makes my cheeks wet and then freezes them hard at -5 degrees. The coldness penetrates our cold weather jacket and makes our back numb. But our heart is filled with joy. That's because we conquered the Aleutian Islands with our own legs. So this issue has kind of lots of this language, again, kind of painting an environmental picture, but one that kind of shows this pride in having captured it and also integrating this into the imperial scheme. So let me show you what is so cool. Okay, so great, more photos and some text. Maybe we'll talk about that in questions. This is the coolest damn thing in these magazines here. This is a cartoon map, and I'll just cut ahead here. Really similar to, I think, this one of the Alaska Steamship Company in 1934, a cartoon map, a kind of fanciful depiction. Here's one of the Japanese Empire in 1942. And let's zoom in a little here, and then let's go to the upper right-hand corner. What do we got here? First glance, I'm like, oh, what is this volcano doing? Oh, just kidding. That's bombs falling onto Dutch Harbor. Here's our occupation of Kiska, our occupation of Attu, and then we have a misplaced and rather ominous polar bear standing these soldiers down. And hold on here, I've got some translations of this. So the map, it says kind of in the center, the War of Construction. It's wide from north to south. So this is a cartoon map. We see, Dutch Harbor, of course, Dachihabe being bombed there. To its left stand two soldiers on Kiska. The soldier on the right holds the rising sun flag, while on the left, one holds a chunk of ice. And he asks, hey, can we trade this chunk of ice for bananas? And to their left on Attu, two soldiers gather around a campfire. While one explains a cold, while another stands watch with his rifle. And then, of course, on that final island, we've got the polar bear there staring them down. But near the bottom of the map, we'll go back one here. Near the bottom of the map, we've got a guy. Let's see, can I even find it? Not from my angle, I can't. Oh, here he is. We've got a gentleman, a soldier here, climbing to the top of this palm tree. It's near, the islands labeled as Bali and Timor, but probably one of the lesser Sunda Islands. And he says, where are the Aleutians there? So we're kind of have that connection at the bottom of the map to the top of the map. I just love this. What an easy way to kind of understand the war. All of these islands are kind of labeled with what resources that we've got, and with the things that have most recently happened in the North Pacific theater that Alaska has now been kind of brought into this imperial imaginary. They're fascinating, fascinating stuff. All right. Issue number 248. Pay attention to our dates here. November 25th, 1942. Our Army and Navy, despite their small size, repelled several attacks behind enemy lines with a determination that one, oh, and I'm out of time. Can I have a minute just to finish here? Yeah, okay, great. Dr. Schneider holds all the power, ladies and gentlemen, with a determination that one soldier hits 1,000 enemies. So here, the Americans are mobilizing and beginning to attack and bomb these islands. This issue really kind of shifts the language of, we're taking this defensive tone, everything's fine, how gallant our soldiers are, but for the first time, they admit not only how many planes that they've shot down, but their losses, not in terms of life, but in aircraft or ships here. All right, we'll go to our very last one here. This issue, the final issue to substantively discuss Alaska, it just says taking revenge no matter what. The articles in here deal with, and really the first admittance of any kind of real battlefield tactics of what happened, any kind of real detail of what's actually happening on the ground, not just in an environmental discussion, is the loss of nearly all of their troops on Attu, which they will spin as being gyoksai. That is the Chinese hisui word meaning to die gallantly as the jewel shatters. And of course, 1943, the major turning point in the Pacific for the Japanese, their empire begins to shrink. The loss of over 6,000 troops on Attu. How do you explain that to the public? You just paint it as beautifully as you can and say, they've died for the emperor. Their death is kind of the shattering of this jewel. It kind of evokes this beautiful imagery there, and that is how the Aleutians will be mentioned in all magazines after the fact. No more environmental discussion there. So, ladies and gentlemen, some takeaways here. What is the perception? Alaska is cold, but it's also humanized as part of their empire. It becomes more than just a battlefield. And this happens because of kind of the renaming of a lot of the geography. Deirdre, wherever you are, ask me a question about the geography and questions there. And then it becomes the site of kind of sacrifice. So anyway, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. Yeah.
All right. Zach, would you help us with passing the baton? Thank you. Do we have questions? Rachel.
My question is for Pierce, and this it has to do with your picture of Etta Jones there. I wanted to ask about the reporting of the relationships of the Japanese to the Attuans after they had stayed there all summer. That's when the Attuans were taken to Japan, and from my readings, it looks like the Japanese had the impression that they were liberating the Attuans and taking them and for that reason they told them to bring all the food that they could. They thought it was a permanent move to Japan. So my question is, was that propaganda, or was that really what they sincerely believed?
No discussion of that at all in here, which I think is fascinating. Now, I believe some other papers, and actually, I think it's your NPS book. Not the wonderful, or maybe is it Nick Golodov's book?
Attu Boy.
Where there, Attu Boy, where there's the soldier that's got Nick on his back. Different sets of propaganda that's not made it into this widely distributed one. So I think it's interesting that the government publication does not release that officially, but other newspapers then tell that story. So whether folks are reading that as widely as this, I don't know, but no mention.
Aaron, you're able to talk whenever a question is asked to you. We have questions here.
I was going to ask a question of Tyler. I assume the Hope Race was envisioned as a regular activity, but only lasted a year or two. What factors contributed to the demise? I mean, logistics, what about politics?
Is this on? Yeah. Hey, great question. I think a little bit of both, to be honest. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, everything becomes a little bit more like freedom, but then everything becomes a little bit more difficult. And so politics definitely played a role. I mean, Yeltsin firing into the White House in '93 didn't help. And so we often blame Putin for the death of Russian democracy, but it kind of starts there. So politics, logistics, as far as I can piece together at this early stage. A lot of big time mushers, Iditarod mushers, didn't want to do this race in the beginning. They thought it was foolish to risk their dogs. And so they didn't, period. Yeah, but good question.
I'm curious. The U.S. Bering Land Bridge race. There's some great kind of ephemera that comes out from that. My favorite thing being the stamp that's issued and some of the postal covers and things, and some of just the publicity that generates. That's a few years before the collapse. There's like a little bit of time to chew on that. Given the nearness of the collapse of the Soviet Union, what is the? I think you intimate this with. How did you say, kind of the syncretism in mushing technology, but what kind of length of legacy is there in the aftermath of this race as opposed to, say, the U.S. Bering Land Bridge race? Yeah, does that make sense? I'm not sure I've articulated that. Okay.
I mean, they keep having it no longer is an intercontinental international race. I mean, they do it in '92, but then they don't. It doesn't happen again in that way. Russian newspapers celebrated like the 30th anniversary of the international race in Chukotka. In terms of ephemera, I'm in the process of digging for that stuff right now. The Hoover Institution has a fantastic collection of Russian and Soviet archives, including things from this period, little tiny interspersed newspapers that maybe had a few issues or sometimes years of issues from all the different human rights organizations that I've investigated in my other book. So I'm guessing I would put money on that these things are there, this kind of ephemera. I mean, when I went to John's house to interview him, he had all of these things he had collected, like the cap, that he made, and banners and other things, like a reindeer antler that he took from a dog dropped it and he quickly grabbed it, and he had a Chukchi man scrimshaw it. And so I think that there's lots of ephemera and sort of pieces of this really material history, I think, like dog sleds and other things like that. But yeah, it's just from my experience in Russian Arctic archives from the European part, the other side of the Ural Mountains, these things are there. We just have to find them. We'll get to you, bud.
Thank you. This question is actually for Pierce, and it sort of ties back to the lantern slides that we saw down at Pikes. This whole business of visual literacy and the way you use vision and pictures to tell stories. And I wonder if that isn't a through line through what Japanese use as manga and the whole tradition of how they gain literacy and how our young kids now are using that same technique through graphic novels. That seems to be more of a visual pass-through as a way to educate people or propagandize, depending on how you want to identify it.
Well, and I think you make a great point here, and your key word is education. I mean, propaganda is a form of education, but this is not just education through propaganda of what we want people to understand the war effort, but also to perhaps improve our literacy rates, or make, those two things can be attached there. A literate public then can understand this effort, and here's an attempt at doing that. So I think you're very keen there, Ron. I don't know if I have more to say on that, but I think it's serving two purposes there. Oh, question on the board from Sue Sheriff for Pierre. Oh, Pierre, I like oui, a little French. Have you met any Japanese historians who've examined propaganda or public perceptions in Japan of the Aleutian campaign? Are there publications? Ooh, Sue, an excellent question there. I have not. So this is, I'd like to publish translations of these, and particularly a kind of digestion of that map. I am most certain that there are some Japanese publications that deal with this topic that will need to be brought in, but for the English-speaking world, there are not. So therein lies some work for me to do. Great question, Sue. Thank you. Brandon? Yeah. Well, Zach, sorry to make you run up. I could have just. We can tag team.
Thank you.
Zach. Yeah.
First off, great presentations from everyone. I learned a lot, and those images of the Hope Sled Dog Race just made me really grateful for my wood stove and oil heating back home. I got really cold just looking at them. But for Pierce, you mentioned that there were mentions of Attu and Kiska after those 4 issues, and we have the imagery of the jewel shattering. But what was the tone if those mentions after Attu and Kiska were lost?
So this, there's kind of an increasing presence of, the loss of Attu. This comes at the same time as the Battle of Midway, around the same time. 2 major losses. That's a lot of death, and the sphere of empire, the defensive edge, is moving ever closer. 1943, 1944, 1945, closer to the islands. That term Yoksai is going to be evoked over and over and over again, and there will be commemorations and memorials for Colonel Yamazaki and the soldiers that died on this battlefield, as kind of what the Japanese public should be prepared to do if the worst should happen there. Yeah, so if Attu is not used and Gyokusai is, those two things can be synonymous. Great question.
Yeah, this is for Aaron. Can you hear me, Aaron?
I got you loud and clear.
Okay, good. I'm struck by the history of the Nome Kennel Club and the long period in which you were involved with all dimensions of dog mushing management. And my question is, how did this prepare you for the Nome Serum Run and for other involvements such as the Hope Race and its movement?
Are you asking me directly as a musher or the club?
Both.
Very good. So I recall the Hope Race in '91 very, very well. And of course, I was still in high school at the time when that took place. I was a sophomore in high school in '91, and I really wanted to travel with them. But at the same time, we all had this very nervous feeling, and we're worried about them taking our dogs. We're worried about a lot of things. And I remember talking to Kate Pearsons, because we traveled together, and she trained out of Kotzebue in those days. She now lives in Nome. But they did want, when they were over in Chukotka, a lot of the locals did want the dogs. And some of the American mushers that were over there, both Mary Shields and Kate Person, left dogs with other mushers. And it really transformed their breeding programs. As what Tyler was stating in there, the dogs over there were a century behind. They didn't have that advancement to the Alaskan Racing Husky. And really, you've got to give a lot of credit in the Alaska Racing Husky and the development from the early days of the All Alaska Sweepstakes, the Serum Run, and the Mail Travelers. Those dogs were evolving for 100 years. And then with the advent of Iditarod from 73 until current day, the sled dog in Alaska has evolved, as well as the education, the care, the feeding, and the diets of the dogs. And And I've talked to many people that ran the Bering race or participated in that, and with your awesome traveling over there, and Mila and others that traveled, and the development of the Russian dog from 91 until the mid 2000s and the teens, when the Bering race was taking place, there was a lot of development, but they still ran a sledge. They didn't run a traditional dog sled like we do here today. And that those sledges are probably, and a fan hitch, which is still used in northern Canada, northern Scandinavia, and in Russia. And I think that makes it easier to travel through a lot of conditions when you're running through ice on the ocean, as well as traveling through different conditions they have. And with the Arctic weather and conditions that those sled dogs are living in there, they are not suited to they are better suited to it than the Alaska Racing Husky is today, because due to the development and the speed that and the faster recovery time with the Chukotka Husky or some of the older breed Huskies that are used, you could toss them a piece of dry fish and they're good for a day. With today's Alaska Husky racing sled dogs, the metabolism is completely different. For them to put out the same effort, the same energy to cover the same miles, it takes a lot more fuel in the tank. And we may be able to do it more efficiently, but we're putting in 10 to 12,000 calories a day, where those Chukotka dogs today, they can get by on 1,500 calories a day and stay fat and healthy, but they're not going to cover the same amount of ground. And so there's a lot of differences between the dogs, but their dogs have developed as well from dogs being left there in their races over the years. It's a really unique change. And being from Nome and growing up, I remember those teams leaving in 91 and leaving town and running up the coast to Teller and Brevik and to Wales, and then waiting for days for a helicopter ride. And most of us wondered if they were ever going to make it back. And it was a big, when Bering Air flew them back, it was a big to do. And I believe they came in on an AN2 as well. The dogs, most of the dogs came in on a big AN2 biplane from Russia, and several of the mushers were able to come on a Bering Air flight. In those days, we called it, I can't remember the term, but Bering Air was starting to make flights back and forth to the Chukotka Peninsula, going to Providenia and to Anadyr, and they would be like once a week at one point, so that friends and family can visit during that time. And it turned into monthly flights, and then slowly tapered off as the regime changed there. But it was a really educational time and very special for those people that were able to travel across. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I have the mic here there. Well, this is for Aaron also. I just curious as to what kind of interactions you and the Nome Kennel Club have had with visitors that pose rather anti-dog sledding questions. And I assume that you have to do sort of an education on that.
You know, that's a great question. And for many, many years in Nome, I did tours for the cruise ships that would come into town. And I even drove a tour bus through some of them and would pull over at my kennel. We did the mushing demonstrations. And one of my most challenging tours, there was a Greenpeace ship that came through. And they were traveling in the Arctic, and they were protesting against whaling and many other things that were up there that are traditional activities. And I remember them coming to my kennel, and before we even pulled a dog out or walked into the kennel, as people were getting off the bus, they were saying that it was animal abuse, and the dogs were on chains in the kennel, and they were just disgusted. And it was really negative. And I just told myself, oh man, this is going to be fun. But then I grabbed a few of them that had the loudest mouths, and I walked them into the dog yard. And I turned a few dogs loose so they could run around and play with them. And I had the gang line set out in front of a four-wheeler because it was summertime. And as I turned the dogs loose, the dogs raced out to the front of the kennel over to where the four-wheeler and the gang line was set up. And they were standing there begging and waiting to go. And as I turned all the rest of the dogs loose that were in that team, I had some of those loudest protesters standing there all along the gang line holding my harnesses, and the dogs were trying to harness themselves. These folks had no idea how to put a harness on, but the dogs certainly did. And the dogs were trying to stick their noses through it. So I took and I taught them how to put the harnesses on the dogs and pull it over their head and pull their legs through and made them a part of it. By the end of that tour, and I threw one of them on the four-wheeler with me, and we took off and we did just a short 2-mile loop that people can take pictures and be a part of. By the time we came in, we watered the dogs on the line and turned them loose to run back to their spots, and the rest of the kennel was begging to go still. And it totally changed their mind. Being able to see it, to witness it, to be a part of it, completely changed their opinion of it. And I think people have their mindset from what they see on TV, on commercials, or it's just an agenda that they're holding. And until they can experience it or be a part of it, they have no idea. I think in my 20-some years of doing tours, that was the biggest day of tips that I'd ever received. But it's part of seeing that experience. And these dogs love it. They're bred for it. And that's what they do. And I think that's a big part of it today.
Hey, thank you very much, Aaron. And thank you, Tyler. Thank you, Pierce. I hope you all have enjoyed this session.
This was a question for Tyler, but at the same time that your Hope race was taking shape, were you aware that Rotary International was expanding from Alaska into eastern Russia? And there were a lot of people from Fairbanks who flew over there to try. A urologist brought a special machine, but they didn't have the proper electricity for it. So that became a problem for a while. And the guy in Fairbanks who sold Twinkies tried to introduce Twinkies to Eastern Russia, but this was more done in the cities, Vladivostok, and some of the Lake Baikal cities, or Urgench, rather than the rural areas.
Yeah, let's chat more about that sometime. I think we're out of time, but no, I kind of sort of learned a little bit about it from David's book on the Hope flight. I'm sorry, the friendship flight. But let's talk more about that. Yeah. Did the Twinkies hit?
What?
Were the Twinkies a hit?
I think they liked the Twinkies, but it was difficult to export.
Yeah. Okay.
Couldn't keep them fresh.